I'm Nick Roush. He's Adam Luckett. This is 11 Personnel coming at you live, and you can see us live at our proud sponsor, Monticello Bank. We will be live and in person at the branch location in Linden, 9900 Ormsby Station Road, June 14th at noon. That's a Wednesday lunch, a little hump day treat. So bring your questions, come by. It's one of their outstanding 21 branches in 14 counties across the Commonwealth. You can visit them at nbcbank.com. They're putting the numbers on your side. Now come join their side and come join us out at Monticello Bank on Wednesday of next week. Joining us today, returning guest to the show. We don't have a lot of guests, but he's been here. We've been there on that SEC podcast. He's Michael Bratton. You know him best as SEC Mike, delivering the takes that will make you quake. And sometimes, Mike, it doesn't go very let's just put it this way. Kentucky fans have been mad at you a time or 2 or 10. But I think that they might not be mad at you this time around. So have you extended an olive branch to the Big Blue Nation?
Absolutely. I mean, I just tell it like it is, or as I see it. And, hey, if that's going to bother some people, so be it. But before we get rolling, can I share the story of you tracking me down at Media Days last year? Have you shared that?
By all means, share it. Share away.
Yeah, so obviously I went a little viral last year, and I feel like I was vindicated by my comments, but that's neither here nor there. But basically I called out Will Levis. I said Kentucky's in for a disappointing season, and, man, that did not go over well. And I'm at Media Days. You know, you're trying to connect with a lot of people, trying to get them on your show. They're trying to get you on theirs. And I got a DM from Roush. Didn't say anything other than, "Where are you?" And within 5 minutes, he was in my face, got a camera ready to go. You can go back and check it out on the archives there. But I didn't know if I was going to get punched or what.
And to your point, you were correct that they were putting the whole team on Will Levis's back. And the one in our fun little back and forth, the one thing that we didn't have an answer for, Luckett, the big variable last year was Rich Scangarello. He could be a disaster, and turns out Rich Scangarello was a disaster, Adam Luckett.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about Rich Scangarello enough on this podcast. Let's look ahead to the future here. Mike, I think you might be pretty high on Kentucky. I'll kind of let you explain, but just kind of walk us through why you think you could, Kentucky's got a little pattern here. They're going big season, kind of disappointing season, big season, kind of disappointing season. Now they're in line for a big season potentially. Why do you think maybe they're in that position?
Yeah, a lot of reasons, and it starts almost always with the quarterback. And I know you guys have talked at length on Devin Leary. Your audience knows all about it, but I don't know if SEC fans in general realize what a quality quarterback Kentucky got out of the portal. I mean, he had options ranging from Auburn with Hugh Freeze, Florida, Billy Napier, and I'm sure several others, but he chose Mark Stoops, Liam Cohen, and Kentucky. So, I mean, that just tells it, the state of the Kentucky football program, beating some of the best in the country for the top quarterback prospect in the transfer portal. And that's not my opinion alone. That's many people's opinion, and many people that I respect their opinion. I love Ray Davis. Not a lot of people watched Vanderbilt over the years, but he was one of the shining stars. I would even go, I don't know if you could say he's an upgrade over Chris Rodriguez, because Rodriguez was so good, but I don't think there's going to be much of a drop-off there. And the receivers, I love the receivers at Kentucky. Back again for a second season, 2 guys in particular, of course, Key and Brown in sophomore seasons. If they continue to progress, this may be the best receiving core Kentucky has ever had. And, you already hit on it. Liam Cohen back for another season. I credit Liam Cohen for getting all that he could out of Will Levis and starting that hype. And if he can do similar things with Devin Leary, I think the offense, barring another collapse on the offensive line, I know that's kind of the big question mark, but if they can get that resolved, I think they're going to have one hell of an offense. And the defense is already elite among SEC schools. They've got probably a top 3 coordinator in the SEC in Brad White. I had someone, Dave Bartu, CFB Matrix, he says Brad White's a top 10 defensive coordinator in the entire country. And he just goes based on numbers. It's not an opinion. It's what the data is telling him. So there's a lot to like about Kentucky. The only thing I don't like, and this is not their fault, but they got to go to Athens, and they host Alabama. They catch Alabama out of the West. So otherwise, I may be hyping this up as an SEC East potential spoiler team, but there's other games obviously, but you're going to have to probably win both of those if you're going to win the East. And I don't know if I'm ready to go quite that far.
I do appreciate though, Mike, that you are willing to kind of push the limits. You have you're one of the few that can make Paul Finebaum blush. So I'm curious, how did that? I want to get more into your thoughts on Kentucky, but I am more interested in how the hell did you sneak your way onto Finebaum, and then now you and Paul seem to have a nice, friendly little back and forth pretty regularly.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you. I mean, I think just him having me on and me making a fool of myself so many times. I was actually just thinking about this recently, but one of the very first times I was on his show, I think it was not the last year of Will Muschamp at South Carolina, but it was the second to last. And I said, watch out for South Carolina. I think they can win 10 games. The Georgia game will be paramount. And, hey, they pulled an upset of all upsets. They beat Georgia. I was looking good. They won 4 games that year. So he had me on like January 1. He wanted to have me on, and he wanted to have me on to roast me for 10 minutes. He said it was the worst take of the year. So I think he gets good entertainment value out of having me on. And, that was awesome at Media Days. I also called out Jimbo Fisher, and that made A&M fans go irate. I basically said Arkansas is a better program, better coach, better quarterback, better coordinators. And I think Sam Pittman had his worst year as a head coach. They still finished above Texas A&M. So I feel like I was validated there. And probably my favorite time on Finebaum, I got to go on set with him, SEC Nation, when Alabama came to Tennessee, and I pulled out the cigar, and I told Paul we'd be smoking those in a day. And lo and behold, that's what happened. So, that was a good time.
And that's the thing, is some folks will gravitate towards the wrong, but you have gotten right. And I think for you to be right about Kentucky this year, a lot of it goes back, yes, the offense is what we like to talk about, that's sexy, but we're at a point now where Kentucky is consistently a top 5 defense in the SEC. And for folks like us who grew up when Hal Mumme just was trotting out guys that tackled air more frequently than bodies, it's a tough pill for us to swallow. And I think that might be why maybe some of the rest of the league doesn't give Brad White and Mark Stoops in their defense that sort of respect that Kentucky's this hard-nosed defense. I don't know what it is, but it seemingly kind of goes overlooked when you compare it to the rest of the, DBU at LSU or whatever it might be. And do you have any idea why that might be?
I think it's the logo. I think it's the brand. And look no further than the over-unders, where I think Kentucky's at 7. I mean, that's just so disrespectful. It's not even considering anything in my mind. So that's one of my favorite overs on the board. I don't mean to compare them to Vanderbilt, but I mean, same deal with them. They're over-unders at 4, and that is just people being uneducated about these teams that they're putting the over-unders on. But, I think when you want to talk specifically the defense, it's difficult to play defense when your offense is going 3 and out and not scoring and struggling against Vanderbilt and struggling against this team and that team. I mean, without the pick 6, they may have not beaten Florida last year. And I mean, Florida, that was one of the most god-awful offensive performances I've seen all season from an SEC team. So, I mean, that defense is legit, except when they play Tennessee, Josh Heupel, of course. But, I mean, beyond that, yeah, I mean, I don't know, to answer your question, and I also think that the transfer portal, I know they lost Justin Rogers. That's a huge blow, but I think what people overlook when it comes to the portal, everyone thinks, which is to a certain degree has been true, that Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State were just going to cherry pick it and they were just going to dominate college football. But what I think the transfer portal has really done is helped programs like Kentucky, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Arkansas, on and on and on, to where we don't have to rebuild anymore. We can essentially reload if we can identify and shore up deficiencies on our roster. And I think Kentucky has done one hell of a job. Where would they be right now without Devin Leary? They I wouldn't call them a bottom tier SEC team, but I certainly wouldn't be saying 10-win season was a possibility if they didn't have Devin Leary on the roster.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think it's really helped out the second tier teams, where you would see peaks and valleys with this team, right? Like Arkansas is a perfect example. They got KJ Jefferson, whatever he is, 4th-year starter this year. This is their big year, but in old school, you would see a big dip after he left, and then they would have to rebuild. I think what the portal has done, it's allowed those teams to really raise their floor, at least to me. I don't know if their ceilings have changed very much with the portal, but I think their floors have been raised, so they can stay in that 7-8 win range and not have the drops to 5 and 7s, the 4 and 8s. I think that's where it's helped out. You mentioned Josh Heupel, Tennessee. Tennessee comes to Kroger Field on October 28th. Mike, who's starting at quarterback?
Ooh.
I mean, I lean Joe Milton, but I am not, even though I'm a Tennessee grad, I'm not one of these crazy people that thinks Joe Milton's going to win the Heisman and Tennessee's going to score 60 points per game. I mean, I am less certain about that than just about anything, because I think Nico is the real deal. But I also think if you're throwing out a freshman quarterback with what is the standard now at 10, I mean, if they go 8-4, it's a massive disappointment. They're not going to do 8-4 or better with a true freshman quarterback. I really don't think so. So the season in a lot of ways does kind of rely on Joe Milton, who the last time, aside from a bowl game, which, some people kind of discredit those all together. But the last time we saw Joe Milton did a meaningful snap, he ran out of bounds against Ole Miss with the game on the line as time expired. I mean, that's what Tennessee's kind of relying on. Now, I think he's a much better player than that, but that was comically bad. I was in the stands. That was probably the worst ending to a game I've ever seen.
Yeah. It was one of my favorite endings. I don't know about you. I love that.
And then you even go to the Pitt game earlier that year. I mean, he was overthrowing receivers about 20 yards, and then Hendon Hooker got in there, and then everybody, I think, in the stadium, and I remember watching it at the bar with Nick here in Lexington before we were going to game and just being like, why wouldn't this guy start? This guy looks pretty good. What were they doing? And then they took off like a rocket after that. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see just how Heupel handles that.
And to your point, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I know anything about offensive football compared to Josh Heupel, but this is what I do in the offseason. I sit back and watch these transfers, and I watched every throw Hendon Hooker made. I watched every throw Milton made prior to them getting to Tennessee, and I said, okay, here's your guy. I mean, it's not even close yet. I don't even know how much of a competition. I don't know if deals were made. I don't know, but that's how I evaluate these guys. And going back to Devin Leary, I've watched every throw he's made. I think Kentucky has upgraded at quarterback.
Yeah, it's just, you mentioned, deals, return on investment. Those people who got Nico there are probably going to want to see him on the field, Yeah, so how long can Milton keep them at bay? Yeah, that's really kind of the that's the low-key storyline I don't think people are talking about in SEC, but that is what, that's going to go. People are going to talk about that all year. When does should Nico be in? How long of a leash does Milton have? And so I was just curious what kind of you thought, being a little closer to the ground, if there was kind of a bar there for him to overtake maybe Milton.
Right. Well, the week to really start that narrative is week 3 when they play at Florida, because I don't think Florida's going to be very good. Yet that has been a house of horrors. It doesn't matter how bad Florida is. Tennessee finds a way to lose nearly every time. I think they've won 2 out of the last 18, and they don't win in the swamp. They are currently a point spread favorite. We'll see if that holds. But if Florida loses to Utah in the opener, which most of us anticipate, if Tennessee beats the hell out of Virginia, which most of us Virginia is one of the worst Power 5 teams. Tennessee may be a 2-touchdown favorite in that game. If they lose it because of Joe Milton, that is going to start that Sunday or probably that Saturday night, for being honest.
That's a good point. I'm curious, SEC Mike, because you do follow all of these coaches pretty closely. I have lost all of my hair because of Eli Drinkwitz. Well, whatever's left of it. Luckett's guy is Shane Beamer. Is there any one of these coaches out there that you just, I don't know, some of their stuff you're just not picking up what they're putting down, and you think that they're kind of backsliding, digging their own grave, so to speak?
Do you mean at their current job, or you just mean as people?
No. Well, it's part of the
As
people thing
showmen.
bugs us. Yes, but
It's not necessarily coaching. It's their
other
acts
stuff
per se.
Is that any of their acts wear thin on you when you're following them around?
I mean, front and center is Reverend Hugh down there at Auburn, but I mean, he's not lost a game yet. But he's doing all the right behind the scenes. Apparently, building that thing up. They're going to be competitive, I think, year one, which will buy him a ton of goodwill. But he's top among my list. I mean, I've made it no secret, not a fan of him personally. I assume among the many, because you've seen the stories. I mean, he DMs me when I'm critical, and I've never tagged the man in a tweet. So he's name searching himself, and obviously you can go down quite the rabbit hole if you Google Hugh Freeze DM, but nothing scandalous. But
Or scandal, you can find both probably.
Right. Well, I'm talking about me personally, but
yeah.
I know my family's from Memphis. He was a high school coach at the same time. A lot of my family's down there. I mean, I don't know. This is going on 20 years of questionable behavior. So if there's 20 years of questionable behavior, I'm led to believe you're a questionable person.
Yeah, and is that gonna work at Auburn? Is it gonna be the most beautiful disaster that's ever happened in the history of? Because I'm fascinated by how things work down there, and I feel like Hugh Freeze is just gasoline that is waiting to blow up in this fire.
Right. Oh, no, I think they can beat Alabama this year. I mean, I could see something crazy like that happening, and then who knows how Hugh will celebrate that. But if word gets out, yeah, I mean, he could be gone the next week. So I think there's going to be high highs. I think there's going to be low lows. Now, I mean, everybody deserves a 8th or 9th chance, apparently, and he's got his right now. So I really hope for his sake and everybody else's down there, he makes the most of it. But, I mean, I feel like it's going to end poorly, and we haven't even talked about Jimbo and Bobby Petrino, but that, I mean,
you can call ball play. Somebody's going to hire you, Mike. Yeah. In the story,
I feel like that's a semi truck that is like probably 8 wheels are careening off the curve right now. But hey, they got a brave faced, Aggie Nation down there. They get mad as hell anytime I question Jimbo Fisher and what he's doing up there, but. If they're happy with 5 and 7, God bless them.
Yeah. You mentioned A&M maybe getting crazy. We've seen a lot of jobs fill these last couple of years, and a lot of big jobs in the league. As of right now, I wouldn't say anyone's on the hot seat per se, but is there any coach you could see that maybe would catch people by surprise that could get fired come November, December?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer there is Billy Napier. Now,
yeah.
Would that be the wise decision? Probably not. They should probably give that more time. But, again, open at Utah. Tennessee, week 3, a team they have owned. Let's say they drop both of those. They still got Florida State. They still got a trip to LSU. They still got Georgia. Do they lose to Kentucky again? No disrespect to your audience, but the Florida coach is expected to beat Kentucky every single year. They can't beat them once. So, I mean, they have got to flip these games. And, I mean, this is not a joke, but it's going to sound like it. I mean, Vanderbilt is a must-win. They lost to Vanderbilt last year. If they lose to Vanderbilt at home, how in the world do you keep this guy as your coach? He's got to be fired immediately if I'm a Florida fan. So, again, I'm not saying that's going to happen. They'll probably surprise a lot of us and have a little bit better because they got a lot of talent down there. I think they're just missing some of it at critical positions. So I don't expect them to pull a ton of upsets or anything, but a 7-5, 8-4, I think that's realistic for Florida. But if it goes the other way, 4-8, something like that, I'd rip that cord and get a coach down there.
Georgia Bama has been the SEC championship. I don't know how many times, but it feels like every single year. But you're not going to go with the chalk, Mike. So tell us, is there an off-the-wall SEC championship game scenario we should be preparing for in Atlanta this fall?
Yeah, I like LSU and Georgia. Now, I don't know how off the wall that is because that's what we got last year, so that wouldn't be that bold. But if you really want to go bold, well, of course, they play each other, so it wouldn't make a ton of sense. But Tennessee and Texas A&M, how about that? I mean, that conceivably could happen. Again, A&M, I got no faith in them, but they got all the pieces. They do have a good coaching staff. aside from the head coach, which that could be an obstacle. And who knows if Tennessee continues this progression, because I sure as heck didn't think they were going to win 11 games last year. Now, I think it would be highly unrealistic for them to do that because of how good Georgia is, because they have to go to Kentucky and have to go to Alabama and Florida. But that would be less surprising than Tennessee winning the Orange Bowl last year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do appreciate too, Mike, that you are one of the few that is willing to. It's kind of like when people kept predicting that Tom Brady was going to be over the hill and then he played like 8 more seasons. You are not afraid to go there with Nick Saban and say he's done. So could Kentucky kill Nick Saban? Could they be the death blow? Could they deliver the final 1-2 punch that knocks Nick Saban off the top of college football?
Well, I'm bound to be right eventually, right? If I say it every year, so I will be right one year. But yeah, it's funny you say that because on my show, that SEC podcast, I can't remember when. We've done so many lists and you know how we do the off-season content, but
right.
we did trap games a couple weeks ago, and the number one trap game in the entire SEC, in my opinion, is Alabama at Kentucky later in the season. Hopefully we get some cold weather. Those Bama boys ain't ready for it for whatever reason. I mean, they can't play on the road. You know, it's penalty after penalty, and they're just oblivious to all these coaching errors that Nick Saban continually makes. Hell, in the LSU game, we all remember the 2-point play that LSU won it. Well, everybody forgets he went for 2 other 2-point plays that they failed to get, and that's why the game went into overtime, because he's making these critical mistakes. And even I believe it was that 2-point play. It was after a timeout. They had too many men on the field. Like, what in the world are we doing? This is not Nick Saban, the greatest of all time that we're accustomed to. It has certainly slipped. I mean, they should have lost to A&M last year. God awful Jimbo Fisher, his play calling cost A&M in that one. They probably should have lost to Texas. I don't think Texas was any good last year, or average at best Big 12 team, but their quarterback got hurt and they lost that one. I mean, all they had to do was prevent Tennessee from going 50 yards in 2 plays with, I believe, 1 timeout. They couldn't do it. This is troubling to me. And this is not a 1-year deal. This is essentially since Alabama got destroyed by Clemson in the national championship game. My opinion on Nick Saban has shifting more and more each year. And I know they won the COVID year, but I mean, that was such an outlier year that even Jimbo Fisher managed to win some football games. So I don't really have respect for anything that happened during the COVID year.
Yeah. And you mentioned they play LSU the week before the Kentucky game, which is going to be the CBS Saturday night game. Their
that
biggest
could
game
be
of the year, potentially.
SEC West championship game as well.
Yeah.
And do I trust Tommy Reese, Adam Luckett? Do I trust Kevin Steele? I mean, oh gosh. You know what? I think Mitch Barnhart would be happy to pay that $100,000 fine to Alabama if Kentucky beats Alabama and the Cats storm the field. Mike, I know you got to get out of here, but I did want to point out just how awesome your setup is. I think you got the best podcasting setup in all the biz. Got all the helmets. Already got Texas and Oklahoma in the mix.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we're ready.
And Gerald Lorenzen front and center right over Mike Leach. And you know, he's a Mississippi State guy, but he's a Kentucky guy too. So I love the nods there with the Cats front and center. Yeah,
well, obviously I'm just doing this out of my house, so you see so many setups, and it's just, I don't know, it looks kind of rinky-dink and stuff. So I'm just trying to up the presentation a little bit to get to reel people in before they get the content and see all the crazy things I have to say. So this is what gets people reeled in. And me and my cousin Shane, we do our best to keep people stay tuned on a daily basis.
Well, if you haven't tuned into him before, that SEC podcast, I owe cousin Shane a bottle of bourbon. I do. It pains me to say. I lost that bet, but you took a little excursion to Kentucky last summer. You tried some bourbons. Do you have a favorite Kentucky bourbon?
Ooh, I mean, obviously Buffalo Trace is at the top of that list. We are actually going back, me and my dad. That's who I went with last time. We're going a week from yesterday, so we're going to be hitting up Heaven Hill, Jim Beam, Jeb the Creek, Bullet. Angels Envy, Old Forester,
area. Yeah.
Mitchers, Evan Williams,
Michter's.
and then
Yeah.
And then Saturday we're going Buffalo Trace again and Wild Turkey. So we're going to be hitting a lot of these places.
You're doing it all. That's awesome. That's awesome. Really getting to the Bourbon Trail. I live here, and I haven't been to that many distilleries like it. So SEC Mike, he's basically an adopted son of Kentucky.
I've been on a handful, and Buffalo Trace was probably my favorite tour of the ones I've been on. So
yeah,
I'm with you there, Mike.
I'll be honest with you. So when we went last year, it was right after media days, and I was like, I mean, I'm not too scared, but I was like, I'm not revealing my location till after I leave because of that media days. I mean, those Kentucky, I had people from, I don't want to mention names or anything, but people within that facility reaching out to me, wanting to know, my whereabouts while I was in the state of Kentucky. I think it was all in good fun, but I didn't let them know until the next day, if you know what I mean.
He was worried about the trail.
Yeah.
You want to
get lost on the trail. SEC Mike, it's been a pleasure. We'll see you on that SEC podcast and at SEC Media Days, where we're only about a month away. So can't wait to get down to Nashville. It'll be a new setup for all of us. But it's been a pleasure, Mike. Appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely. Anytime you guys need me, I'm happy to join your show.
SEC Mike from that SEC podcast, joining 11 personnel. You can join us next week, like I said, at Monticello Bank, noon, Wednesday in Linden, 9900 Ormsby Road, I believe is the address. More details, scroll down on the podcast post. We got it. I like it. His Nick Saban takes kind of get me uneasy, but at the same time, he makes some good points, especially about the coaching kind of mistakes and how bad, I think for me, more of what it is the undisciplined football on the road. And if Kentucky plays well enough, what if Georgia is their only SEC loss to that point, right? Like,
could you imagine the Eric Wolford takes? I mean, everybody, you kind of forget that, right?
Yeah, because the smoke died down on that. But
we got a lot of ball to play before we get there. But yeah, that's not a that's one of the if you're going through the schedule, that's one of the likely you've got two really likely losses that you're putting in the likely loss column. That's one of them. But see how the season plays out. Alabama has issues, but they also got the most talented roster, arguably most talented roster in college football. There are the warts that people are pointing out in a big way this offseason. We have to see how the season shakes out. But yeah, they've struggled on the road. Like the road game, like Ole Miss almost beat them last year. Like that game went down to the wire, and there's been a lot of games like that for them on the road. And so we'll see what happens this year. We'll just have to see. But I get why people are saying it. I'm a little more hesitant, just because. What if they do? If they figure it out at quarterback, if something if Ty Simpson just turns it on here in fall camp, they could, they might be the best team in the country,
right?
Because of the rest of the roster. And so we just got a lot of ball. That's a game. Like, to me, when you're talking about the season, that game for Kentucky is way down the list. Like, way down. There's a lot more important games, I think, for the Cats.
In when I was filling out my path to upsets, that one was the most difficult to kind of figure out because Kentucky's a 3-touchdown dog, or they're at least a touchdown dog in 3 games. Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee. And I think the Tennessee game, Kentucky could be a 7-point favorite by the time that gets here because Tennessee is such a wild card. I did want to clarify on Mike's behalf, though. He meant 10 total wins. 9-3 win a bowl game, what they've done the previous 2 times. So that does, that means you probably win one of those games you shouldn't. You probably lose one of those games you shouldn't. We've gone through it quite a bit up until this point, but I enjoy having SEC Mike on to hash out some of his spicy and meet the balls. But we need to get into the kind of nitty-gritty of the recruiting because it's a big recruiting time of the year. We've been at camps. I was at a camp today on Thursday. There was one Sunday. There's been official visitors in and out all week. We've got more, arguably the biggest recruiting weekend of the year is coming up this weekend. Then you're going to have another one the next. But first, let's briefly touch on the camp aspect of things because there hasn't been one giant star-studded sort of event with a lot of people working out. But Tuesday, you had Cutter Boley coming in while some official visitors were on campus. Today, Liam Cohen issued a new offer to a 2025 quarterback that has some really intriguing film. I got to watch him today, and I like quarterbacks with a compact throwing motion, right? Like it just kind of gets out of there quick, and he moves well, right? Back in there in the pocket, his name is Scotty Fox. Scotty Fox sounds like a quarterback. He's got quarterback hair. He's from the Cleveland area, had an offer previously from West Virginia. I want to say maybe Purdue and some other smaller schools, but another 2025 quarterback on the board. And what I wanted to see in person, Luckett, was how big was that arm? And two, the kind of sling it behind your ear throwing motion, they can be good, but sometimes it can be bad. I know I'm not being very specific there. There were a couple times where I felt like he was shot putting it a little bit, but when he gets moving, he really reaches that arm back and delivers the ball accurately down the field. So Cohen ultimately decided to offer that scholarship afterwards to add another name to the mix in 2025, along with Stone Saunders, who's expected to camp with Cohen next week.
Yeah, these camps typically regarding QB recruiting are important because you get to see kids throw, you get to get them on campus, and it's really when your evaluation, I think, gets sped up on these quarterbacks a class ahead. And so it's important to get guys on campus so you can see them and work with them. And so
Cohen said at one point too, he's got to see him in person before he's going to make a judgment on them one way or another. He's pretty picky. He wants to see him throw in person.
Yeah.
And this is their really only opportunity.
And so the problem Kentucky runs into sometimes is just getting these kids on campus. A couple years ago, Chris Vecina was kind of the big one who kind of started to blow up. He just did the big schools, right? Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, on down the line. And so they couldn't really get him. They got him on campus. He stopped in for a half-day visit, but they didn't get to see him throw. So it's always important that we want to see him throw. Cincinnati St. X quarterback, Chase Herbstreit, youngest son of Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know who Kirk Herbstreit is, I'm not sure why you're listening to this podcast.
Imagine having to explain to somebody who Kirk Herbstreit is.
Yeah.
Oh, man. He's
So
this guy who talks football, and he's on TV all the time.
So he's in the class of 2025. He's going to Ohio State, Notre Dame, all the big schools. He's not going to camp at Kentucky. It's not seeming like, even though Kentucky's kind of recruiting him the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sign that it could be difficult to get him.
Yeah.
But then there's kids like, Ryan Montgomery and Stone Saunders, who they've had a relationship with. And Saunders is sounding like he's probably going to be the biggest fish they're going to get to camp, at least that we know as of right now, next week. And so finding that next quarterback in 2025 is important. So building options so they can have guys they can look at is a good sign.
Yeah. I did want to add, before we move on to more recruiting, part of what these camps are, like, we see all the current players out there, right? And they're kind of hanging out, maybe working out a little bit. And it's the first time we've seen a lot of them since spring practice, or first time ever. Grant Godfrey was one of those guys, and that dude looks good in shorts, right? He's a first off the bus kind of guy. That's one of those. It'd be nice if you could kind of stash and dash away for a year or two and then just see what we got here. But also could just be a starter next year, right? They're going to start him out at edge. So curious how that goes. And then the other one I wanted to mention too, when I think about the young receivers that are really good, I just always forget Shamar Porter, even though he could be the best of them all. That was the first time seeing him in person, and he's as big as Dane. Like, he's a big old kid, like, that can high point the football, really talented. So just a couple that I hadn't seen before, but finally getting to see in person, you're like, oh, even though it was a quote-unquote kind of down year, Kentucky was behind in recruiting, they still got some guys that look like they can be dudes in Lexington in the future.
Yeah, I think last year they closed really strong. Now, I think the ball bounced their ways on a couple things. When you talk about Luke Fickell leaving Cincinnati, and you talk about Jeff Brom leaving Purdue. If those two things don't happen, I don't know if Kamari Anderson and Kendra Gilbert are on the roster right now.
Right.
And those are two of the freshmen I think people are more excited about. And so, will that, can you bank on closing that well as they did last year? That's the big question, I think, with this class currently. So now it's, it's closing time. You play the song if you want to, but this is what recruiting really is all about at the end of the day. And I do think the NIL distraction was kind of a thing this time last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe Kentucky didn't have money, maybe they did, yada, yada, yada. That doesn't seem like as much of a thing, even though Mitch Barnhart was in D.C. yesterday with the rest of the college sports world, asking for our government to help.
We love to stray into politics on this show. It's our favorite thing, and it's also abundantly clear that they're about as effective at getting things done as Jimbo Fisher is at scoring touchdowns.
Yeah,
there we go.
Just to get
just for our friend SEC money.
So that's going to be, they're going to handle that however that ends up getting handled. But for right now, what my point is, I think they're in better shape than they were last year.
Yeah, it feels like that at least.
Yeah, maybe it's just we know a little bit more, so we're getting better at jobs potentially, or they're just, these guys are talking more. Maybe it could be either or, but it feels like they're in better. But they just got to close on these guys, Nick.
Yes.
Yeah,
so let's get to some of those guys that can close on. Yeah.
The first one is Brian Robinson, top 200 edge. Nick, I'm going to name the top 250 players they've gotten from Ohio. It ain't many. I mean, you're talking Lynn Bolden, Tyrell Asian, Alex Safari, Darian Kennard. I think there might be one more, but Brian Robinson's the fifth, or it could be the fifth or the sixth. Yeah, he would be the fifth per On3 industry rankings.
Yeah.
Because you have to think, if you're a top 50 kid in Ohio, you're probably a top 5-6 kid in the state. Ohio State's taking you usually.
So they have, well, speaking of, he was camping there today, and that's kind of, it's very rare for somebody that old, but it's very much so he's camping to see if he can get an offer, and if not, probably commit to Kentucky. He was at Ohio State, but I'm not sure if he. Yeah, actually,
they can go to these camps and not camp, right?
Just hang out, which is the case for most guys who are of the.
Callan Fox, who's a 4-star blue chip tight end in the 2024 class. He was at a camp at Kentucky last year. And this was a kid that just kind of went to everything. I mean, he visited hundreds of schools. He's probably going to end up at Florida State. I think he's got picks in for Florida State. He just showed up and just did nothing. Like, it was just there.
Same thing with Elijah Melendez today, who I think Zach's talking to, who's 4-star linebacker from Florida, just a big badass.
And then you'll see guys like
stands around.
Arvell Reese kind of did the same thing, but then just kind of decided, hey, I want to jump in and do a couple things.
Yeah.
And so what actually did Brian Robinson do there? He's been to Ohio State a few times. Just where are they at? But it's like, by all accounts, it seems like a 2-horse race, and we'll get into Ohio State here in a minute, between Kentucky and Michigan. He canceled his Penn State OV this week, says he's going to reschedule. But by all accounts, this is Kentucky and Michigan. I think Kentucky, Youngstown. Kentucky's recruited him for a long time, had him on campus a bunch of times. I think they've got a chance to close here. I've put in a pick for Kentucky to land Brian Robinson. I believe he told Chad Simmons he would like to commit in the summer, so that could potentially be one of the guys you see commit around 4th of July, which is a popular commitment date in the recruiting space. I think he's the biggest target on campus this weekend. To me,
or he could just pop them. He could
full court. Well, he could. Yeah, he could give us. Well, last OV, he could just go ahead and give a silent. Right. I mean, that's probably what I think the goal is over in that football building, is to get him committed before he leaves campus this weekend.
And it's encouraging that he left Michigan without it. But if you follow along closely, and if you're a part of KS Board right now, I mean, if this is the sort of stuff you love. We're talking about it, hourly, about updates from all across the country. And one of those latest updates was late last night. Jaden Smith announced a decision date. And he's one of the many Michigan or Kentucky guys, a.k.a. Steve Klingscale versus Vince Marrow on the recruiting trail. They did this in the last class. They're doing it in this one. And for me, what's been surprising is how many of these guys that Michigan has actually taken this early in the process. They're pushing for early commitments. And it says a lot to me that they've been pushing for these early commitments. Brian Robinson was officially visiting last weekend, and they didn't get that early commitment. It feels like in this whole Vince versus Klink, I think Michigan's going to have a lot more cachet right now. You should, after back-to-back college football playoff appearances and Big Ten titles. So they should have had the upper hand, but it does feel like that this is one where Vince Marrow set his sights on early and is keyed in. And if he can get this one, it's huge for an optics standpoint. From the practical pass rushing standpoint, Luckett, I think he's done a great job of developing over the last year. I worry, after Khalil Branham, I'm always a little hesitant on the guys who are sharing workout videos and tweeting all their meals and stuff like that. But I do get the sense that he's a good kid. He's going to work hard. And I also wonder this. I think right now he's like a true 4-3 defensive end. I wonder if he has he feels like a very much a run-stopping edge setter and less of a pass-rushing 3-4 guy. What say you?
Yeah, I still need to dig in some of the research here, but yeah, I think he's he might be more of a heavy-handed, physical run through you, power first. Still needs to develop his refinement as a rush specialist. But he's definitely a kid, physically.
Yeah.
He's going to be ready to play.
Mm-hmm.
And this position, Nick, this is a premium position.
Yes.
Everybody wants these dudes. Are you 6'3", 6'4", yoked up, and can you knock big-ass 320-pound tackles backwards, and do you have the athleticism to go around them and bend the edge and rush the passer? This is a premium position in football. There's a reason why you see 5-6 of these dudes go in the first round of the draft every year. Everybody wants these dudes. Kentucky's done a very good job recruiting this room for Kentucky standards. I mean, you look in the room right now, J.J. Weaver, Keaton Wade, Tyrese Fearbury were all top 300-ish, all 4-star prospects. And then Brian Robinson can continue. That's stacking a room, stacking layered recruiting. That's stacking talent and spacing it out. And so you have a line. This is not a position you want to go in the portal to try to find.
Right, yeah. Good luck.
And so, getting these guys out of high school is very important, and he can just kind of continue that streamline that they have. And it's just, he's a really important recruit. If you don't get him, this Ohio class is not, doesn't look great. Mm-hmm. You're not in on a lot of, guys.
And it keeps the Youngstown alive, right? Like that. There's just a lot of things that make Kentucky fans warm and fuzzy.
They need a win over Michigan.
Yeah.
Whether the Michigan men will tell you it's not a win. They need to get one. Michigan's, Kentucky maybe got the big fish, big number 0. It's playing on their defensive line, Deion Walker.
Right.
But Michigan has got them. I mean, last year Michigan kind of handed it to Kentucky.
There was that safety from Youngstown.
Jair Hill out of Chicago. You had the two Youngstown guys, that the 3-star guys. DJ, trying to think of their names right now off the top of my head. But also you had Carmelo English, who Kentucky recruited for a long time. Cameron Calhoun, which was a roller coaster in of itself.
A whole mess, right.
There's just been a few of them. And then in this class, they're going to get the Smith twins.
Yep.
They've already got a half of one.
Yep, they'll probably get the other one now.
And so you got it, to get this one would be a big deal. And then you've got your pillars on each side.
Yep,
You
got
got
an edge.
Cutter Bowley on offense. Then your top 2 ranked players are at premium positions,
And
guys you can build around.
And the third premium position, the other one that can hear its name called number one in the NFL draft, is offensive tackle. And they got one coming in this weekend in Jonathan Daniels, who on 3 ranks as the number one offensive tackle in America. And then next weekend you've got Shaq McCroy coming in, who is kind of an Oregon lean right now, but they're picking up some steam with some other offensive tackles. So there's it's on the table. Now, Daniels, that's one of those that it reminds me of when Chris Collins got a couple of those Florida DBs in for official visits, but it was early and they were going to visit elsewhere, and it was just going to be hard to retain any momentum there. So I'm not going to get my hopes up too much for this kid. But getting him on campus is huge in and of itself, because it's Georgia, Alabama, Clemson are his other big 3 ones. I think Florida State, because he's a panhandle.
I think Florida
guy.
State and LSU are kind of the top 2.
Okay.
Right
I know he's
now
got a
for him.
Georgia OV coming up, and that's probably what stuck in my head. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, just getting him on campus is significant. But I did want to shift away. We were talking about Kentucky versus Michigan. Kentucky versus Ohio State. Luckett, we had some early week shenanigans, unlike anything I've ever seen, when Justin Rowland reported that Sam Williams-Dixon was on Kentucky's campus for an official visit. And it was accompanied by a tweet that says, "I'm a running back, I'm not an athlete," from Sam Williams-Dixon. A little bit of defiance, because he's the 3rd running back in their recruiting class. But all these websites list him as an athlete, on 3 included. And Kentucky's telling him, dude, you're not playing receiver there. You're going to play running back. You want to share carries with him? So they get him on campus. Ohio State coaches, not happy. This is a program that does not like when their commitments go elsewhere. And look at those quotes that he gave Jeremy Birmingham, who covers Ohio State. It was basically a public apology to Ohio State. I've never seen anything like it. It was quite an eventful 2 days for the 3-star running back, Sam Williams-Dixon, who's actually from Columbus. So fascinated to see what happens next, because he has an official visit scheduled to Ohio State this weekend.
Yeah. This is one where it's important to know, how to read the language here. Ohio State's got 2 tailbacks in the class. They added one 2 weeks, a kid from South Florida, a top 300 kid, 2 weeks after Sam Williams-Dixon committed to them. So he's probably not super happy about that.
No.
He's saying, I'm a running back now. He's probably not super happy about them having 3 tailbacks. 2 are ranked higher than them. Typically, teams don't add more than 2 running backs in a class. So Vince Marrow is telling him, in my opinion, probably what he's telling him, they're over recruiting you. You can come here and be our number 1 guy in our class.
I've been telling you this for years. He was,
we've got all these seniors in the room. You can come in and get carries right away.
Mm-hmm.
And so come here. You can play in an NFL offense, yada, 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 yada. And so Kentucky's able. The fact that he made the official visit and did tell him should tell you a lot, in my opinion.
Yeah. Especially doing it. He could have just very well officially visited Ohio State and then gone to Kentucky next week, too. But they got him down here now. So I'm fascinated to see what's next.
Yeah.
When I spoke with some sources at UK, they weren't expecting a flip to be imminent by any means. But also, that relationship might be beyond reconciliation at this point.
We're going to find out how much Ohio State values him.
Yes, very soon.
We're going to find out how good Ryan Day thinks he is after this weekend. If he decommits on sometime next week, they probably don't value him very much. They're probably all right, you can just go.
Yeah.
But Ohio State has to be careful here, Nick, because Pick North, where he's at,
Yeah.
is a pot. I mean, they get a lot of kids from there. Jack Sawyer, who's going to be one of their best defensive players, was a top 10 recruit a couple years ago. He played at Pick North. I mean, they get a lot of guys from that high school, so that's one of their pipelines. They're probably not going to want to, burn a bridge there. So how they kind of handle that, it's just going to be a situation to watch.
Yeah.
But it's important that Kentucky got it. They needed to, for that to even happen, they had to get him in for an official.
Which, speaking of recruiting hubs for Ohio State, Vince Marrow is not too shy to go to Glenville, which is just outside of No, it is in Cleveland. Who am I kidding?
Yeah.
Is it the Tar Blooders? What are
Yes.
they called?
Tar
Blooders?
Yes.
Great nickname. Demarion Witten caught a 39-yard touchdown pass in the state championship game. It's seemingly Kentucky versus Ohio State for this 4-star recruit. He's good. Top 300 overall prospect by a lot of the recruiting rankings. He's officially visiting Kentucky this weekend. He'll be at Ohio State later this month. I saw somebody at 0-3's Ohio State site, Letterman Row, put in an RPM for him to Ohio State recently. But the Buckeyes do already have one commitment from top 250 tight end out of, I want to say Florida, if I'm not mistaken. LeBlanc?
Nashville.
It's Nashville? Okay. But
Pretty
LeBlanc
sure,
is his last name.
Max LeBlanc, yeah.
And this is just a fascinating dynamic. And I'm
Chattanooga. He's from Chattanooga.
Okay. But Witten's a good ball player. You're really high on this guy. And Kentucky's also kind of high on one of his teammates, too, in Fred Johnson Jr., that is an offensive tackle from Glenville who will also be officially visiting this weekend. And there's just a lot of dynamics in play for both of these Ohio guys, or hell, all three of these Ohio guys we've discussed that Vince Marrow is in the running for.
Yeah, Deshaunte Jones, too, unranked running back, will also be in Lexington this weekend, another Glenville guy. You worry Witten is kind of heading down the same path as Arvell Reese. Like, as long as Ohio State stays away, you feel like Kentucky probably going to get Witten, but I'm not sure they're going to stay away. I like Witten a lot because he's kind of a prototypical, I think, flex tight end. Kind of in the Jordan Dingle mold. He can line up one-on-one, beat coverage. He can run after the catch. Good athlete. Create space. And he's got a big frame that he's only going to, I think, grow into in a college strength and conditioning program. You could see him being you could project him as being a real weapon in a college offense. So it would be nice to get him for what Kentucky does. But it's going to, you've got to, it's Ohio State. So and it's Glenville on top of that. So
right. Coached by Ted Ginn Sr.
If they come, he's going there. It just is what it is. Mm-hmm. But if they don't, you got a great chance. And he's a guy that you might have to sweat out until, like, he could decide in December just waiting on a Ohio State offer.
Or waiting to see if he's a take, right? You just kind of don't take him Ohio. And a lot of it comes down to, as if you're members of KS Board, a lot of the putting the pieces together is also being well aware of what's happening at the other schools they're considering, and that's why Luckett's one of the best. And right now, what is it, $1 for 3 months or $50 for the year? If you sign up during our summer special, so check it out. One thing I didn't put behind the paywall, though, Luckett, is I submitted an RPM with some pretty high confidence that Kentucky is going to put the squeeze on Willie Rodriguez and secure a commitment from the Covcath tight end this weekend. There was a time there, Luckett, a few months ago where we're like, are they gonna offer this kid? What's going on over here? Because South Carolina, Arkansas, Vandy, they were all offering, recruiting him, and you just worried that Kentucky might get behind on this kid. And part of the reason why I think there was some hesitancy is, first and foremost, Liam Cohen is a little bit more selective. He's a little bit on the picky side. They have a lot of young tight ends, so if you're going to take some, whoever you're getting up next, you want to make sure they're a ball player. And the other part of it is Rodriguez really did kind of, I heard he grew 2 or 3 inches in the last year or so and is now legit 6'4", 225, right? Like, he has that SEC build now. And when Cutter Boley committed, first guy he mentioned is, who you going to go get? Well, Willie Rodriguez. Boley's going to be officially visiting this weekend along with, is Abaselm using it too, or is it just Hayes Johnson?
Yep. All 3 commitments will be in Lexington this weekend.
So they're going to be having the best time possible. They're going to do the thing where we're being all friends, and then one night's going to come along and be like, all right, so we're going to do this or what? I anticipate Kentucky locking up Willie Rodriguez this weekend, and that might be the first to go public. You kind of reference maybe you get a silent commitment or something like that elsewhere, but this one might be the first one that really gets the snowball rolling for the rest.
this is his third official visit. He went to Purdue last weekend. He was supposed to midweek at Virginia Tech, and then going to Kentucky here. So, yeah, I think you've put it in. I think they're going to try to leave here with a commitment, and I think they probably get that. I think you mentioned Fred Johnson. I think they're going to do the same to him too. Mm-hmm. They're going to try to get him in the boat. Goes to Louisville. Supposed to go to Louisville and Pittsburgh the next 2 weekends. Do they try to? Hey, don't do that. Just go ahead. Let's get you on. So those are two I think to watch potentially this weekend. Early commits, but Rodriguez definitely sticks out, and he's more of your traditional Y tight end blocker in line. And that he'd be a good match, I think, if you could get Witten. But you got to look like you're losing Bates. You know, this is the hype channel of Josh Caddis. But after that, you've got to. What is Tanner LeMaster? What does he look like? You've got to kind of backfill with guys who can block. Big tight ends who can block, and I think Rodriguez kind of fits that mold. And you've mentioned Notre Dame, Nick. Gonna have to keep the Fighting Irish away, keep them out of Northern Kentucky. But this would be a solid. He's underranked right now. He's a low 3-star recruit, but a lot of that is because he's a late bloomer. This would be a very solid recruiting win. He's got a nice offer sheet. Go ahead and get him, and then get your 4th in-state guy in the class, and then start branching out from there. But would fill a need on the roster, and again, with layered recruiting, helps them backfill that tight end room, which I think they've built pretty well, and they haven't needed transfers to build that room. They've done that with strictly high school recruiting.
I want to get to some questions too from our viewers. We have taken up a lot of oxygen. We appreciated having SEC Mike on earlier. Jerry is not very happy with me. He says that I ignore the listeners because I can't keep up with Luckett. But it's mostly just because I'm worried my internet will get shot having the StreamYard up and the YouTube up. That's definitely happened before. But he did ask a valid question. He's like, hey, Luckett, what do we think? The state of
these sales just can't compete with St. X, Jerry. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It just is what it is. Just acknowledge the elephant in the room.
He said, are we good with no? Are we good with no? And if you want to take it.
Depends who you ask, right?
Yeah.
Depends if it's Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday.
Depends on what player comes up. But
I think that as of right now, they're in a good spot. Now we'll see if they lose the recruitment that they didn't want to lose, if that changes. But as of right now, this is a fluid situation. They're in a much improved spot from this time last summer. I think they've got their ducks in a row, especially how Mark Stoops, I think, kind of wants it. Mm-hmm. Barry and Brown and Deion Walker are still on the roster. That should tell you a good amount. Devin Leary's on the roster. Those guys aren't on it if their NIL situation is not in order. So I think they are like where they're at. They got Cutter Boley. That's probably another sign. That I think they're in good shape there. Yeah. Now again, that could change. Matt could go on the radio on July 4th or right after July 4th and tell us they're not in good shape. But as you know, this thing is fluid. But I think as of right now, yes, to answer your question, they are in a good spot.
And what I liken it to is it was horrible timing, but just being able to open up the collective to the public. I think in a lot of situations early on in the NIL era, they were relying solely on individual boosters to foot the bill on a lot of this stuff. Now there's all right, here's kind of our baseline budget that we can work with where there's money that's consistently going to be there. And it's helped in the portal. I'm not sure how moving forward, but I haven't heard any sort of concerns about Kentucky and name, image, and likeness.
And it's big in high school, but it's really big in the portal.
Yeah.
Especially going to get these top guys. Yeah. You want to get the Learys.
The Cortland Fords, You
got to have your money right.
I like this question, too, from a little bit earlier. What's more likely, Georgia or Bama? You got to pick one. Who's the easiest one to upset, Luckett?
Alabama's at home.
Yeah. And
even though they haven't seen them play. Well, we saw in 2020 and it got ugly. But they do. they do match up well with Georgia in a lot of ways, but I don't know if it's well enough to win a game. It's kind of a keep it close.
Well enough to keep it close, yeah.
Where they're in the fourth quarter and they might, like, last year they sneakily, like, that game was, it almost got kind of scary for Georgia.
Yeah.
If they hit on that wide delay over the middle,
mm-hmm.
and Dingle breaks the tackle and scores, that's a totally
different game.
I mean, cheeks could have got tight over there on that Georgia sideline. And they weren't playing well that day, and they really didn't have a good feel on offense. It could have, and it was cold. It was kind of everything we wanted in that Georgia game to be. And I've always thought, like, I don't know if Kentucky can win that playing that way, but I left that game thinking, well, if they got to catch Georgia they have to really catch them on an off night. But if they catch them on an off night, they can beat them. I could see them beating that Georgia, how Georgia played. It's just getting, you can't have no control over them playing like that. And so I would say Georgia's probably a better matchup, but Alabama's at home. Alabama might be a little bit more vulnerable. Alabama's got more, I would say, unknowns as of right now than Georgia does. And going into Sanford Stadium is just
it's tough.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that it's a little bit earlier and they got a new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. We talked about it last week. They still got a ton of offensive weapons, so a lot to overcome. It did remind me, though, that the rules, I don't know if we ever talked about it once they got changed, but clocks aren't stopping anymore after first downs, except for the final 2 minutes. And Kirby and Mark, they love those long possessions, keeping that clock turning and burning. So that could certainly come into effect that game. Also excited to see how that works for our 7:30 SEC Network specials. Like that,
you trying to get home before 3 a.m.?
Dude, that Akron kickoff time stinks. That stinks out loud. That's the weekend of Bourbon and Beyond. I think the Black Keys are playing that night. I don't know how many people would rather watch Kentucky play the Zips and Joe Moorhead or the Black Keys. Yeah. We appreciate y'all following along today. I love some folks. They shouted out Woodford as their favorite bourbon. That was Kevin.
Woodford's good. Who doesn't love Woodford?
Oh, yeah. You can't.
It's the most
go
popular
wrong.
one. Yeah, it's the most popular.
Especially with like all of the, top or upper shelf. Like even the really really expensive ones, I'm still just fine with Woodford.
Which reminds me, we got into a long conversation at the Combine with a gentleman from South Carolina who talked to me and Nick about bourbons for at least 90 minutes in his bourbon adventures.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was like flying all over the place for him. Was real big on it, and then he ended up recommending something to me, and I just completely forgot it.
It was the birthday.
Yeah, birthday
one. Bottles
of Old Forester or Blanton's or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, that was the first I've really heard. I'm not too into that game, but he was.
I'll happily sip on some Jefferson's by the Sea too. That stuff is wonderful. Or just any bourbon that would like to sponsor 11 Personnel. By all means,
we're open.
I'll stack your bottles all around my desk like I'm SEC Mike with football helmets. Right? We're open for business, and that's why we'll be at Monticello Bank on Wednesday. That's Wednesday,
14th.
June the 14th, noon. 9900 Ormsby Station Road in Linden. Very convenient location. Come hang out with us during your lunch break. Bring some questions. We'll be happy to answer. We're still going to be live on the YouTube channel. We have those capabilities, so you'll still be able to get to listen to us. And cooking up a fun little surprise next week. Might be our a little bonus episode before Luckett hits the road on vacation. So we might be double dipping in order to take a little bit of a break. But we appreciate you all subscribing, liking the page, and following along with us. We'll see you next Wednesday at noon at Monticello Bank. For Adam Luckett, I'm Nick Roush. This has been 11 Personnel.